So let me get the thing to load. So we're actually going to be working here, lesson two, how to actually prepare stock. So we're going to look at, so here's your ratio here. So you want to go with bones, vegetables, water, and some mirepoix. You can incorporate other vegetables in mirepoix, but you have to be very careful because some vegetables will make a really strange or off flavor. I wouldn't want to use, say, broccoli or cabbage because your stock would kind of taste like a big fart. And so you want to be kind of careful, stick with your aromatics, particularly as you first start making stock. So when you cut the mirepoix, they're typically in stock making, you're going to strain it back out. So a lot of times I just very roughly chop it. People are not going to see it. It's just there for aromatics and flavor. A lot of the time, my mirepoix that I use for actually making the stock has been frozen. It's the ends of onions and carrots. It's not the pretty stuff. It's just the pieces that you want to save for scraps that you save for adding flavor to it. So you're going to cook it and then you're going to strain it all out and just use the liquid. If you're making a fish stock, you can cut it smaller because it's a shorter cooking time. Most of the time, I just have it like big rough pieces and toss it in. So a bouquet garni is essentially just a bundle of herbs. And so you take herbs and you tie them up with a little string and then you drop them in. And that just makes it easier to kind of fish back out. If you have smaller things, then you want to actually create what's called a sachet. So a sachet is some cheesecloth and then you tie that together and it's like a tea bag. So a tea bag is essentially like smaller flavoring items and they're held together in the little bag and then you can fish it back out. It's easier than just straining them out later. So a white stock, you typically want to blanch your bones. So you take your raw bones, and when you blanch them, as we talked about in the last unit, you bring it up to a boil for a very short period of time, and then you toss that water out, and then you start again with the cold water. And this is going to take some of the impurities out of the bones, and that's going to make your stock a little bit more clear. Depends on what you're doing with it. What's your purpose? Are you serving this to guests? Are you making a super clear soup? Or are you going to put this in the base of something? So the blanching just removes the impurities. It's not necessary depending on what you're doing with it and where you're using it, but you're just going to kind of skim the stuff up, drain the water, and then start again. So this is what it looks like. You just kind of like cover them with water. You get the nasty kind of foamy scum off, and then you just move forward. Oh, sweating. Okay. Sweating, when we talked about cooking methods, we talked about dry cooking versus moist cooking. There are a lot of food items that are not going to taste the same if you boil them in water versus if you cook them around in fat. So with the vegetables, particularly the mirepoix, the onions, the carrots and celery, you're going to get a different flavor if you sweat them. So sweating involves a dry cooking, but you typically kind of do that with the lid on. So you just cook the mirepoix and stuff to release the flavor, and you do that in some amount of fat. So that could be butter, it could be grease, it could be oil. You're not cooking at super high temperature, so it doesn't really matter what type of fat you do, but you're releasing different flavors by cooking them. So you just want to cook them till they're soft. You are not trying to brown them. You are trying to soften them and release those flavors. And that is referred to as sweating. So sweating is used quite a bit. It's a very important cooking method. It's used a lot before I do the soups and sauces as well. So it softens it, releases moisture, develops really good flavor, but it is not for caramelization. When you make brown stock, you do caramelize. So everything that you're going to do in your base before you add your liquid is going to be browned. And you don't want to blanch the bones. You can put them on a roasting pan. You can do them in the oven for about an hour. You kind of stir them around. Just don't allow them to burn. If there's a big difference, we've talked about this before, between burnt and caramelized. Caramelized is golden brown and delicious, and there are different levels of caramelization. You can go lighter or darker, but once you've crossed over that line into too dark, then everything that you do from that point forward is going to taste very dark, and that's no good, and you don't really want that. So then you're going to go from the roasting pan to the stock pot. You can use that same pan. You don't want to do the bones and mirepoix together because they're not going to go at the same rate. The mirepoix needs less time. And you want to make sure too, after you've done the bones, that you deglaze the pan. So we talked about deglazing with the last couple of labs. When you roast and caramelize, the bottom of your pan has this really golden brown, delicious, good layer. Again, if it's burnt, you don't want it. If it's just browned, it's really good. Take a little bitty amount of water and put it in the pan and kind of swirl it around, and it'll bubble up and it'll get that good stuff off the bottom. So stir and scrape, dissolve and remove all the caramelized material and make sure that you get that in. So you want to put that into your stock because that's going to be that's the good stuff. So that's a picture there of what the deglazing looks like. Just a little bit of water just kind of gets it all good. You also want to caramelize your mirepoix. You can do that in the same pan. So a little fat, roasting it, deglaze it, the exact same process. So your vegetables should get a nice, dark, deep color on them, and then add that. When you make stock, whether you're making brown stock or white stock, always start in cold water, and you want to simmer it. So last unit was about cooking methods. Boiling is big, high heat, rapid bubbles. You don't want that. That can mess your stock up. It can make it very cloudy. Things don't cook right. You want to simmer it. You want bubbles. You're not poaching, so you do want to see some bubbles, but you don't want big rolling bubbles. You want to strain it. So you don't really stir it. That can make it kind of cloudy, but stuff's going to cook to the top, and you just take your ladle or take a skimmer and lightly get that foamy stuff off. It's just impurities that are no good. It's really, really important to cool the stock quickly. This is a very big TCS food item. Remember, all the way from Unit 1, TCS. Temperature controlled substances. These are food items that bacteria likes to grow in. So stock is not going to keep very long in the refrigerator. It needs to be cooled rapidly. If you leave it out at room temperature too long, it can spoil, it can grow bacteria, and it can make people really sick. So cool it quickly, store it properly, and degrease it. So after you pull it out of the refrigerator, overnight, you're going to get fat that's going to float to the top of the surface. And depending on what type of meat you use, so if I use like chicken fat, then you just kind of pull that off. You can actually put that in a side container. That is referred to as schmaltz. So schmaltz is pretty common to use in cooking. It's good to like fry potatoes or French fries in. It's just animal fat. It's a good cooking medium. It's a low smoke point oil, but you could definitely add that into things. Make gravy with it. Make a roux, which is on the upcoming lesson with it. You could leave it in you could just heat it up and stir it in and leave it in, or you could take it out. So most of the time we take it out of the stock. So combine everything, cold liquid, simmer, skim, do not boil, add the cooking aromatics the last hour of cooking. It generally takes 8 to 10 hours. It's kind of hard for me to make a lot of stock at school because of how long it's a full day of being at school. I have to get it going really, really early in the morning. And even then I'm staying after school to cool it. You work in a restaurant though, or if you're at the house, like on Sundays or something, when I'm at my house, I'll just make stock and it goes for a long period. And then I have nice stock, and you can freeze it for a long time too. So simmer it for 8 to 10 hours. That's how you get the good stuff. You want to strain it. So you can use a coffee filter or some cheesecloth. Use it immediately or store it. And so I cool it down. A lot of times I will store it in Ziploc bags or even put it in ice cube trays. And then I have like perfect little, like couple tablespoons to make something with, and put it in little ice cubes of stock in a Ziploc. And you just throw them into all kinds of stuff. It's super useful. But really, really important. So make sure that within 2 hours that it comes down to 70 degrees. Use that thermometer. It should be cool to the touch. It should not be warm. And then you want to go from 70 to the refrigerator within another 2 hours. A lot of times at school, what I do is I fill a sink full of ice. I put the stock pot in the sink. with the lid on, and then I fill the sink full of ice. So there's ice all around. That is called an ice bath. And then I stir my stock every 10 or 15 minutes to keep the temperature, so that way the inside gets the cool of the outside and it stirs that temperature around. And then I usually within an hour get it down to 70 degrees with the ice bath. So it's nice that we have all that ice available. And then I get it into the refrigerator. And you don't want to, and here's a photo here of what an ice bath looks like. You just kind of stir it around. You don't want ice inside of it because then you water down your stock. So you don't want to do that. So once it's cooled, you can put it in a cooler. Do not put the stock pot in the cooler if it's not cooled down. You can ruin everything in the refrigerator. So really, really important. And then here's a picture here of what the schmaltz looks like. So pull it out of the refrigerator, scrape the fat off the top, use it, or it makes your stock healthier, or discard it if you want to. But it's easiest to defat the stock after it has been cooled down.